Every year, water becomes a more urgent concern here in California, and with climate variability and declining groundwater, new solutions are needed. And we're excited today to hear from one innovator at the center of it all. Please join me in welcoming Clark Easter, CEO of Global Water Innovations. Clark?
Okay, so about 9 years ago, shortly after I turned 65, I decided that I need something to keep my mind active. So I looked around for a good question to pursue, and I decided that figuring out how to solve California's water crisis was a worthy goal to lend me neuroplasticity in my declining years. So having said that, I looked at the situation and I was sort of dumbstruck because I saw lots of brackish groundwater throughout the state, astonishing amounts, which I'll point out in a minute, and I couldn't figure out why no one was using it. And so I looked at the cost structures of desalinating it, and I had lots of people in the industry say, well, it's cheap, it's only like $800 an acre foot. And I was like, okay, so I looked at the economics, which is something that most people don't look at, and quickly realized that farmers can't pay more for water than the value of the crop that's produced by that water. And that seemed to be totally obvious to me, but is not obvious to much of the industry. And so I began to focus, and the second thing I discovered was that all the industry people were lying to me. And the reason is that none of them included the cost of brine disposal. And so when you actually looked at the numbers and you figure out what it costs you to get rid of the brine associated with desalination processes, all of a sudden you're not even at $800 an acre foot, you're over $3,000 an acre foot, and that's if you're lucky. So I realized I had a task in front of me, and I looked at the technology and I went, we're not going to cut it with the current technology. So I actually found some kindred spirits. I joined with Peter Fisk, who's the executive director of something called the National Alliance for Water Innovation. And basically, it now consists of several hundred of the top research water scientists across American universities. Not surprisingly, a number of them are California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, et cetera. And it's also a number of water companies. And it's also, much to my delight, a number of innovative entrepreneurs who are trying to solve real problems. And as I've pursued this path, what's become clear to me is that there isn't a single answer, but in fact there are multiple answers that are starting to come more clearly into focus for me. One of the first things is that it isn't that we're out of water. What we're out of is fresh water. And so there are multiple sources of water around us every day that could be used for agriculture, and we need a lot of it. We're talking several million acre feet a year, at least in my estimate, 4 or 5 million acre feet a year, to bring California's agriculture back and to really give it what it needs every year. The first place to begin is with what I call single contaminant water, and by that I mean stuff that has hexavalent chromium in it, stuff that has 1,2,3 TCP in it. If you look at, or arsenic, there are lots and lots of these individual things. There's even stuff like high BOD water from vineyards that's being discharged, or there are all sorts of sources out there. The second place is to create new supplies of inland water from desalination. Again, in a moment, I'll show you how much desalination is out there as possible. The next thing is to reinvent seawater desalination. When you talk to people about desalination, all they think of is ocean, and they go, oh, it takes too much power, and there's all the sea creatures being sucked in, and you create this horrible brine, and plus, who wants a huge plant sitting on the beach? And the final area is, how do you solve the biggest problem that blocks effective groundwater banking here in the state? And many of you may be aware that Metropolitan has banked some of their water. A couple years ago, they tried to pull some out in one of the droughts, and lo and behold, it was contaminated with 1,2,3 TCP, and they couldn't use it. So all of a sudden their bank balance went to zero. We have to be able to effortlessly infiltrate groundwater into our land and pull it out safely. Banking is far more economic than building more big dams on the surface. Studies have come out that show our land under here in California, we could bank astonishing amounts of water. I've got one basin where we can put 2 million acre-feet in. Think of that. That's bigger than the biggest dam that's being considered right now, and we could do it at 1/10 of the cost. So there are huge opportunities out there. Let's see what happens. Okay. So let's talk sort of one at a time. The contaminant problem. This is a list of the top 10 killers here in California that are in the groundwater, plus some others. They're all the standard stuff, but now we're starting to get some more interesting ones like PFAS. All of you are now starting to drink Teflon in your water supplies, cities, etc. Again, if I pull up a map of GeoTracker from the state and I look at how many wells here in the state are contaminated with this, you're talking into the thousands now. Every time one of those wells gets contaminated, that's another chunk of water supply that disappears from usability. We also, things that may resonate more with you are things like pesticides, antibiotics, pharmaceutical residues. I remember sort of one of my moments was when I saw a study that showed in salmon off of Seattle, there are now 60+ pharmaceuticals that are detectable in their flesh. Those are coming out of our wastewater treatment plants because our wastewater treatment plants do not touch pharmaceuticals or antibiotics. These are all water treatment issues. Finally, I've got lots of, we're working right now with a meat processing plant, working with vineyards that are trying to reclaim their wastewater. All these things, dairy lagoons, these are all sources of water. They just need to be treated. In the last year, there's a technology that is starting to emerge, finally with the strength. I saw sort of primitive versions of it a couple years ago. I finally found a real version that it's electrooxidation. You basically take DC current, use specialized electrodes, very high amperage. You end up generating what are called hydroxyl radicals, hydrogen peroxide, oxygen, etc. It's a process that mimics what happens in nature, and yet this stuff destroys pollutants of all sorts. Everything that's on this list can be effectively and relatively cost-effectively knocked out and destroyed and broken down into safer substances. The next thing to say to you is that we don't just have a water problem here in California, we have a salt problem. The Central Valley is a huge bathtub. Many groundwater basins are smaller bathtubs. From the mountain water coming in for irrigation, et cetera, we're bringing in about 3 million tons a year of salt. You add in agricultural nitrates, things like that. If anybody's taken a look at nitrate contamination in the Central Valley, it's pretty scary. Just because if you're a woman and you're pregnant, you don't want to be drinking that water. So it is, and there are other issues that are involved with it, but you're seeing the salt levels build up across the basins. If you look at this map, all the stuff in red, not only is it bad for people, but it's bad for your plants. There's a credible study out there that shows that we're already at $3 billion a year in losses in the Central Valley from salt buildup. How did they figure that out? They looked at satellites data that measures conductivity in the soil, and they cross-correlated it with the crop production for every acre in the Central Valley. And so the damage is already huge there. What most people don't realize is if the water shortage doesn't kill us, the salts will. The land becomes sterile over time as it builds up. So this is a significant threat to future agriculture. We have to start getting the salts out of the Central Valley and other agricultural basins. And again, all of this is not a California problem alone. I can be in the Murray Basin in Australia or in the Indus Basin in India. They've all got the exact same problem, and it's all being exacerbated by temperatures levels that are increasing. And so solving this here will solve it in places all over the world. Currently, one of the reasons that desalination has not progressed in California is the costs of disposing of the brine are off the charts. So when I first started 7 or 8 years ago, you could get 80% recovery. That means that you could get 80% pure water if you were treating a brackish source. It meant you had 20% left with all the salts in it. What do you do with that? Well, currently the only valid things you can really do, there are 2 brine lines that go into the ocean, one in Ventura County and one down south, Orange County. Or you can take it to a sewer plant. You can truck it to a sewer plant that has a special permit. And it's extraordinary, or if you're an oil company, you can deep well inject it. But all of those are extraordinarily expensive because water is heavy. So if you're tanking a lot of brine, it's extraordinarily expensive. So these are not new thoughts, particularly on getting the salts out of the basin. There was a group that put a huge amount of work into the Central Valley, CV Salts Group. This is something from 2016. Their plan was to build 32 different RO plants across the Central Valley, and they were going to build a pipeline that connected all those plants and pushed the brine up to Oakland. This was really before people realized that, in fact, highly concentrated brine does not do well in enclosed water bodies, relatively enclosed. They would have turned that bay into a death zone pretty quickly just by dumping all the salts in. So clearly that idea didn't go any further, and the whole sort of Central Valley scenario for getting salts out right now is what I would call an impasse. It's what they politely call managed degradation. It has to change. We have to start getting those salts out. So why can't you recover 100% of the water when you desalinate? This is a sort of a cross-section of a membrane. The most cost-effective way of treating most water now is through a membrane. It's tiny, tiny holes. You push the water through those holes at high pressure. The salts can't fit their way through the holes. They stay behind. They build up in the brine. The problem is as the salts build up in the brine, you have what are called hard salts or sparingly soluble salts. These are the calciums, the magnesiums, the sulfites that you know of, but they can also be silica and other things depending upon what's there. So coming back to NAWA, the National Alliance for Water Innovation, out of the relationships, I sat on their Ag Steering Committee and pushed them towards solving the brine problem. Out of my work with NAWA, I began to work with a number of companies that I've somewhat served as an incubator for, helping them move along and get towards pilots. Starting in next month, we're going to be doing a series of 5 pilots across the state, showing 2 competing technologies head-to-head for softening the brine so that we can then push it up to a much higher concentration level so that we, instead of being at 85% recovery on water sources, we can jump up to 98% recovery. We'll be producing a final brine up around a couple 100,000 parts per million at a cost that we hope is going to be under the magic number I set 8 years ago of $800, getting all the way from water, fully including brine recovery, et cetera. Why does the problem of brine stop almost every inland desalination project in the West? That's been the reality for the last 20 years because the economics of it, unless the city is on a brine line, it just doesn't work. I looked into trucking farm brine in Ventura County. I couldn't make it work. Just as an illustration, and this isn't just a problem for ag. I happen to live in Cambria, which is a little town on the coast down in San Luis Obispo County. They have an RO plant that they built because we're perennially short in every dry year on water, frantically short, where people don't get to take showers, et cetera. And yet, so we built an RO plant many years ago, about 9 years ago, and we can't use it because the cost of getting rid of the brine from it would bankrupt the town. So what's it cost to get rid of brine there? 25 cents a gallon to truck it to an ocean disposal point. Even though we're on the ocean, we're not an approved ocean disposal point. So 25 cents a gallon and $66 a cubic meter. That's out $81,000 an acre foot, just to put that in perspective for you all. And that's why desalination inland sites does not work. This is just a layout of what's going to happen at Canberra. We hope to cut the cost of their brine disposal from 25 cents a gallon down to about 2 cents a gallon. And all of a sudden, that plant will be viable for the city to use. Seawater desalination is another key place. There's a real breakthrough coming in seawater desalination that I think most people just don't even get yet what it's going to mean. Instead of using huge pumps on a beach installation like Carlsbad, some of you may have been to Carlsbad down San Diego and see that, these plants will actually go underwater. They'll be modular. They get dropped 1,200 feet under the water, so off the coast. And at that depth, the water is very clean. There's no fish to be sucked in. There's no little sea life. 90% of all sea life is in the top 600 feet of ocean depth. So by the time you get down to 1,200 feet, there's nothing. What else can you do there? Well, the water pressure is such that you don't need pumps driven by high electricity. The water pressure itself will push the seawater through the membranes and desalinate it. So in addition, because there's no biological life at that depth, you don't need to use chemicals, no antiscalants, no biocides, no risk of fouling. All you have to do is once you've desalinated the water using water pressure, you then have to pump it up to the surface. So there won't be anything on the surface except a pipe coming out from the ocean. And so this is going to be a huge benefit. The first installation will go live in Norway, we think within the next 12 months. And from there, they've got buyers lining up all over the world. We'll be representing them here in California. This is, I think, my most exciting project I'm excited about. This is Pleasant Valley Water District. This is a groundwater sustainability agency down around Coalinga, well, that's why the city of Coalinga surrounds it. 20,000 acres of pistachios. This is a great example. They never got hooked up to the state water project or the Bureau of Reclamation project, so they dropped the water level by 400 feet over the last 100 years. And there you see all the classic symptoms there, degradation of the supply. Their TDS now is up to it's over 2,000 ppm. And it's starting, even their salt-tolerant pistachios are starting to go, we've had enough. So this is one where what they want to do is bank water during flood seasons. They have fabulous infiltration. It's all been tested, et cetera. The basin can hold 2 million acre feet. Why? Because they dropped it 400 feet in depth over the last many, many years since pumps were invented. So we're going to bring in floodwaters, but I want you to think about this a second. This basin can hold 2 million acre feet, more than any dam here in California, and we can do it at a fraction of the cost. And why is that so important? Why? Because we're in a cyclical climate here in California. One year is horrible drought, another year is incredible rain, and yet we're totally unprepared to deal with that cyclical nature. What do I mean by that? Many cities get state water project. Many water districts do. And yet when they bank that water in wet years in San Luis Reservoir, the next time there's a rainy season, what happens to that water that they thought they had? It gets flushed to the ocean. Why? Because the primary purpose of those dams is to protect from flooding downstream. And so many water managers have suddenly discovered that all that water that they thought they had no longer exists. This is asymmetrical storage, meaning this basin has an anticline around it, a rock wall. And so water that gets put in there is going to be there, and so cities will be able, and irrigation districts will be able to bank water in wet years and pull it out when they in fact need it in dry years. We will be testing, this is the first site, we're going to start testing these two new technologies to soften the water and show we can get to zero liquid discharge. We'll be starting those tests in July, and we think this is going to be profound. Ultimately, we think we'll have an 80,000 acre foot per year desalination facility there. Why? Because when you bank water and you pull it back out, you get whatever was in the groundwater. So when we pull this out, it's going to have a lot of salts in it. It'll get better across years, and we'll need less and less of the desalination, or we'll be able to blend more. But that's the plan here. In addition, we're going to face another interesting problem that nobody has faced before. When we get to zero liquid discharge, suddenly we're left with some very serious quantities of salts. For every acre foot that we desalinate in this basin, we're going to have 2 to 3 tons of salt for every acre foot. And so what do you do with those? Well, we actually have 3 plans of what we can do with it for this basin. One is we can sequester carbon. There's an incredible ability to take agricultural waste and basically use the salts that you generate for biomass pickling. And you may go, that's crazy. Well, think how our original oil was created. All of our oil today was formed by plant waste, compressed. We think something very similar could be done. What the salts do is they suppress all microbial activity. People have looked at, I will say something flat out. I've studied the economics of carbon capture. Agri-plants beat human machines 1,000 to 1 currently. You see these big machines in Iceland, et cetera, pulling carbon out of the air. Plants are so much more efficient at doing that, it's off the charts. I mean, it's laughable that people have wasted their time on machines. So you have the ability to take agricultural waste, to take biofuel crops as another example. 45% carbon, huge ability to sequester carbon. With this one plant here in Pleasant Valley, we could sequester more carbon than anybody has sequestered in the world so far to date over the last 10 years, cumulatively, aggregately. So there's astonishing ability. We can also make industrial chemicals out of the salts if we want to, things like hydrochloric acid, caustic acid, et cetera. Those things are all possible. We can recover minerals. Magnesium is a big one. I'm working on a lithium project. So there are all sorts of possibilities out there. So I think that sort of gives you the big picture of what we think is possible across the areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. We have time for a couple of questions. Real quick, I want to ask you, what's your timetable on these 5 pilots that you're starting this year? What's your timetable on getting the results that, I mean, to show you can get to the $800 an acre foot?
Is this on? Yes. Okay. So the answer is we're going to know. We're trialing 2 technologies head-to-head against each other at each of these sites. A couple of them are ag sites, and a couple of them are cities. We're going to know by end of year if we've hit our target or not. And just to give you an idea of the impact on that, we're working on about 150,000 acre feet a year of projects right now that are all waiting on the results of these tests. Huge pent-up demand, not only here in California, but also Texas, Arizona, et cetera, because if we solve the brine problem, inland desalination becomes viable in a very big way.
And you talked about sequestering the carbon. Does the economics of this depend in any way on a revenue stream from the carbon sequestration? That's obviously a
So the answer is yes. Look at carbon sequestration is out of fashion at the moment. And even so, there is a carbon market in Europe, also here in California to some extent. So there is some money available from that. Currently, if I talked about the big companies that are using machines to pull carbon out of the atmospheres, their costs are up around $1,000 a ton. We, in fact, think we can do it all in for about $80 a ton, and there are credits that cover at least some of that right now. Plus, you see companies like Microsoft subsidizing this in a big way. Why? Because AI data centers. So I think there's an opportunity that we could at least cover it a good portion, and across time it might in fact subsidize desalination to a very big extent.
Well, we make this the last question. Our questioner asked, Bill Hoover asked, if Pleasant Valley has a 2 million acre-foot capacity, how much can be banked in a wet year? That's obviously a key question here.
Yeah, so the answer is, and it will actually answer the second question as well. If you have an area that has infiltration, you can put in tremendous amounts of of water into the ground very quickly. Pleasant Valley has some old dried up stream beds that have coarse gravel underneath, and so we've actually done some tests, and the ground just, we couldn't stop it from pulling the water in. As fast as we put it on, it was disappearing into the earth once we took the top clay layer off that stream. So the answer is very quickly if you've got great infiltration, and then the next sort of part of the answer is it depends who your partners are. Some of the guests who are lined up to come see our pilot in Pleasant Valley are some of the biggest water districts in the state because they're all looking for what I will call asymmetrical storage, water that they know they put it in the ground and they can get it out in a dry year when they need it with certainty. So that's that, and water at a certain standard when it's pulled out. So.
Yeah, thank you, Clark. Join me in thanking Clark for presentation.